Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the hosts and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have a problem with these thoughts, FYP. Recording live from FYP Studios East and West, transmitting across the internet. This is episode 161 of Registry Matters. Larry, we are getting closer and closer to that age of yours.
We've still got a couple of decades to go, but we are closing in.
A couple of decades.
Yep.
We're getting there. Can't wait till we pass it.
Another 20 so episodes will be there.
Here we are at 161 already. Amazing that we've made it 161. Did you think we would make it past like 16 episodes, let alone 161?
I really didn't have any idea what we were doing when we started, so I didn't have any expectations other than it was the nuttiest thing I'd ever heard of.
What is a podcast, you said? Tell us a little brief synopsis of what's going on tonight.
Well, we're going to have some listener and reader submissions, at least two, possibly a third one. At least we'll touch on the third one. And then we have a guest, a treatment professional. We're going to talk about if treatment can harm a person who has not committed a sexual offense, and that's out of our area of expertise. And then we're going to talk about a case out of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals dealing with conditions of supervised release on the federal side, polygraphs and porn bans. And then we're going to do a little brief legislative overview and tangentially touch on a bill that's pending in New Mexico. And then we got a couple of stories to talk about that should fill out the podcast, and it should be lots of fun.
Outstanding. Well, let's dive right into question number one, because this one makes me giggle. It's like, I am innocent. I'm convicted of a sexual offense when no activity in a sexual nature took place. I was simply riding to Alabama from Louisiana for a funeral when pulled over. 4 hours later, I was arrested for trafficking heroin and human trafficking. It was not a sting operation, just pulled over for a so-called tag light out. Circumstantial evidence exists, but the truth is I was not human trafficking. Nothing of a sexual act took place. The young lady, who was 27 years old, stated that while visiting me in Louisiana, I had tricked/coerced her by drugs to escort. Wow. My request is that any available insight on laws of a sexual nature in Alabama be sent to us, because this method is being used to genocide us here and across America. That sounds kind of crazy to me, Larry.
Well, not so crazy to me for a couple of reasons. The human trafficking has been so expanded at the instigation of victims advocates and the Polaris Project and all these people who insist that human trafficking is at astronomical proportions in the United States. I'm not convinced, but they say it is. And if you redefine enough crimes and make them human trafficking, of course it would be an exponential explosion in the number of cases. But what they've done is redefined stuff that was already illegal. They've made it more serious, and they've put the label human trafficking on it. It reminds me of the Bush versus Gore case in 2000 in Florida, when the trial judge, the Florida state judge, I believe his name was Souls or something like that, but he was sitting there and he had denied one of the attempts to stop the counting, and they filed the same motion again and they put emergency on it, but it was the same content. And he says, I'm reading your motion. He said, it looks like essentially what I've already ruled on, except you just stamped emergency across it. And that's what's happened with human trafficking. But in this particular case, of course, we can't delve into it because we don't have enough information. And we wouldn't be able to if we had all the information, because there's no one licensed to practice law. But what I would say to him is that clearly they must have found some activity, some evidence related to the drugs. And then as they discussed the accompaniment of the young lady with you, she probably said some things that were different than what you said. And she may have said that because she had motivations to avoid other charges. We don't know enough about why they would have made a deal with her to turn on you. But that could be what happened. And I'm guessing that you did a plea, and now you've had second and third thoughts about the plea. But when you did that plea, remember, when the judge asked you, were you satisfied with your attorney? Hey, do you realize that you're waiving all these rights? And they would have read a list of rights that you were waiving. And you said yes, 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 yes. They ask you if you were under the influence of any intoxicants that would render you incapable of understanding. When they ask you all those things, I'm quite confident you said the correct answer, which means that if you did, in fact, do a plea, you're going to have a very hard time on doing that plea. Not saying it's impossible, but you're going to have a very hard time.
Also, Larry, when and I know we're just like totally no more details provided, but it says it was just pulled over for a tag light out. They would just come up and look at the car and they would say, "Hey, you have a tag light out. Here's your $50 fine," and move on. But something else made things take 4 hours.
Well,
like I'm going to totally like exaggerate this, but they walked up to the car and they saw someone with duct tape wrapped around their hands in the back seat, and they said the tag light was out. That's why you got pulled over. But they found I know that I'm exaggerating. I'm not trying to like put words in this situation's mouth, but something caused it to take 4 hours before they arrested him.
Well, I would tell you that if you look at the name, that probably tells you a little bit about the ethnicity of the person. If you look at the city in Alabama, that tells you it's in the boondocks. I mean, who's ever heard of Brent, Alabama?
Oh, I see.
Now he doesn't tell us.
He
doesn't tell us that's where it happened at. That's where where he's incarcerated. But I'm guessing that it probably didn't happen in one of the larger metro areas. It probably didn't happen in Birmingham or Montgomery. Or even.
And you're
Mobile.
saying this is a minority too, so someone was just being like totally harassed because they're a minority.
I would say that based on the profiling that happens in this country, that he would have gotten more scrutiny, particularly if there were an age differential. A reasonable officer is going to ask questions if you've got someone as old as I am going back to the Lincoln administration, and we've got a young person with us. So the first thing that they're going to ask is well, you're trained to be on the lookout for things suspicious that you might need to. I mean, you just saw the story or heard about the story of the kid that was in the restaurant that had bruises and marks all over him, and the restaurant manager held up a sign that said, "Do you need help?" And the kid signed yes. And they came and arrested the people. Okay. So I would guess that this looked a tad bit suspicious, probably driven by biases. When they ran his ID, they probably found some criminality in his past, which that in of itself does not justify searching the car. But then officers, once they find your record, they magically smell something emanating from the window.
Okay, I got you.
Or they see something in the floor that looks like it might be paraphernalia, and then they ask you, "Are you carrying any? Do you have any drugs in the vehicle?" And of course, the person says no. And then they say, "Well, you don't mind if I take a look?" And the person says, the way they phrase the question, no, and the way the officer asked the question, it's no either way. You don't mind if I take a look. And the person says, "No, I don't want you to take," but they just say no. But the officer takes it, "Well, no, I don't mind if you take a look." And then they start looking around, and when they start pilfering, then they see more evidence. And then they call for the dogs. And then the dogs come to the and they always alert. I mean, the dogs almost always alert because, I mean, that's what dogs do. I can't say that dogs are trained to alert because I don't have that expertise, but I can tell you that if the dog hangs out in your car long enough, they start pawing at something.
Yeah, they will find something.
And then all of a sudden, based on the dog's training, they search the vehicle. So they found the drugs, and then they would have separated the two. And then they would have told her that she's in all sorts of trouble, that they found these drugs, and she would have told them what they needed to hear, because maybe she didn't have a criminal record and maybe he did. And they told her that she was going to end up holding the bag because it was found on her side of the car. And then she told a story that met what they needed to hear, and they needed to make a case. And they made a nice case. They got their human trafficking because she said she was being coerced, and she might have gone totally free. There's a lot of stuff we don't know about this case, but I'd be interested if he writes back. I'd be interested if he writes back and tells me how close I described what happened.
All right. I didn't want to stick on that long, but I did have that, like, they held on to you for 4 hours before you were arrested. So I just wanted, like, something else happened that we're not hearing about. All right. Well, then let's move on. And this is the hate mail for me. It's like, I've got a beef with Registry Matters and Narsal. Andy recently told his story about getting off probation years early, and that's all fine and dandy and great. Unfortunately, it's obvious that neither of you have a clue what it's like to be stuck inside of a COVID-ravaged prison with no idea what we are facing when we get out. Why can't you people tell us in simple English what will be required in terms of registration and what the rules of supervision will be when we are released? How are we supposed to comply if we don't even know what they will require? Psh, Larry, get on that crap.
So, well, I mean, it is a valid point. What you don't know can be very terrifying. And trust me, we do understand that. I bet you remember how terrified you were about what you didn't know. And
I wrote some letters myself and couldn't get anything back. No one would write. Like, you have no flipping clue of what is going to be tailored to your situation. But we can give people, like, roughly an idea of, it's not going to be this, but it might be that.
So I'll say that your attorney either didn't know what you were facing or could have deliberately minimized what supervision as a sexual offender would entail. If they actually had told you everything, say they did know everything, if they actually had told you everything, you might would have had second thoughts about whether you wanted to do the plea or not. And then in terms of registration laws, they are really complicated all over the map from coast to coast. There's so many variables. So we really can't tell you specifically what you're going to be facing. We can tell you in generalities. For example, you go to the extreme Louisiana, they require you to pay the cost of knowing everyone within a certain radius of your residence.
Right.
Well, obviously, if you're in a population center, if you're in New Orleans, if you're in a populated area, the number of people and the cost related to that notification is going to be more than if you live in a rural part of Louisiana. But registration is going to have a lot of similarities. I mean, they're going to take a lot of basic information. They're going to give you a list of things that they want from you. They're going to take fingerprints and photographs. They're going to take a DNA sample if they already have it. They may take it again even if they do have it. And they're going to give you a list of things you're forbidden to do, and that list will vary dramatically from jurisdiction. If you live in Vermont, there won't be nothing on the list. If you live in Louisiana, Mississippi, there'll be a lot of things on the list. So we couldn't begin.
Don't even like fart in the wind, and you're going to be in trouble.
We couldn't begin to tell you all the stuff you're going to have to face in registration. And then in terms of probation, that can vary dramatically from county to county within the state. You'd been a testament to that. You've got 159 counties in your state. And you know from your advocacy work what people endure depending on what county they're in compared to what you endured in the county that you were in. And so it's like we can tell you that probation generally is not going to be fun. We can tell you that. And we can tell you that they will really come down on you harshly if you do any pushback on anything that they tell you to do. The bottom line is, folks, you're going to have to do what they tell you. And when I give that answer, people think I'm being curt. I'm not. When you see your probation officer, they're going to give you a list of things that you're going to have to do. And the bottom line is, unless you want to be in the place that you were just released from, you're going to have to do those things. And the list can be very long, and you won't like some of the things, but you really don't have any choice until your period of supervision concludes.
I will tell you that when we did cover that, I forget what episode that was, like 155, when we discussed this, I did discuss that I have like some sense of, quote unquote, survivor's guilt, that you will agree with me that I have not had, it wasn't the worst of probation that you have seen. So I know how bad it is for some people. And I feel like I did dodge a whole ton of bullets. But that said, here we are trying to help people navigate this whole crazy mess too, and try and figure out how to make things better. I feel like somewhat of an obligation that I do have these freedoms and did have these freedoms. I don't have to really worry about it that much now, but I know that I dodged a lot of bullets, and I told people that from the start. So for someone to reach out and go, "Oh, we don't know what it's like," BS. We do know what it's like.
Well, and then we get the request for the registration statutes all the time, and they can be 30 to 50, maybe sometimes more pages long. And if we could send those, I mean, the expense when you start talking about sending a large envelope with 30 to 50 pages in it, yeah. When they say, that's probably the most common letter that we get is at NARSL, and now letters are going to come to the podcast. What's the registration law in Ohio? Well, you're going to get a document. If we were able to send it, it's going to be a very thick document. It would cost a tremendous amount of money for printing and postage and time to ship those. Now, as a part of our C3 status, I'm hoping that we can actually begin to do some of those things, maybe at a very modest token cost. But when you ask those questions, the reason why we don't answer them is because we can't answer them. It's too specific to your geographic location and what the rules are for supervision in that particular county and what the state requires. And then, like, for example, even in my state, we have, as far as I know, the only prohibition in the nation that says law enforcement cannot collect anything that's not on the list. And I put that language together, and I helped pass that language in 2013 to stop law enforcement from inventing requirements. I just received a phone call a week and a half ago from a person in a county just south of Albuquerque that says he gave me a list of things that sheriff is requiring of them to do. So even though it says a sheriff can't collect any information that's not in the statute, and we're the only state in the union that has that, they still do things. So we can't even just look at the statute and tell you these things because they invent things that are not in the statute.
I gotcha. I would also like to point out that what you just described, though, is that the language exists because who put it there?
Me.
Okay, just checking. I hear people push back about, well, what are we going to be able to, like, we can't vote, we can't do this, we need money to do these things. And we're going to talk about this coming up later in the show. But you have a unique set of skills. And I like to use that a lot because there was a quote in a movie from Liam Neeson in the movie Taken where the guy calls the kidnappers and says, I have a unique set of skills. And I consider this to be you, but you are the one that does a lot of this work. And it is doable without a lot of money, and it is doable without a lot of support from other people. It can be somewhat of a solo job that you can go make a lot of change if we would just get people that would go visit our legislators and build relationships and whatnot.
Build the relationships and have credibility. The relationships don't come easily, and you have to establish yourself with credibility. And most of our people go in with a chip on their shoulders, and justifiably so in many cases, but they go in with this holier than thou, you ought to understand this, you put me in this way. Yep, that's what they do. and everybody knows that I'm getting screwed, and honestly, everybody doesn't know that you're getting screwed. A whole lot of people serving these chambers have no idea what registration's like. They have no idea what you're going through. They have no idea that you can't go to your schools with your children. It's never occurred to them. They've never been told. All they know is that there's a registry, and as far as they know, you have to go to law enforcement and put your name on it. They don't know what it entails.
All right, and then we will move over. We're going to say somebody wrote in and talked about moving to the United Kingdom, and they wants to know stuff that we can't really talk about. Can you fill in those gaps there, please?
Sure. We have a regular listener on the podcast that joins us, and I don't think he's here tonight, is he? But we have a regular who is
he just showed up,
a dual citizen, and we're going to bat this around after the podcast and see if he can offer some insight. And we'll probably come back to it depending on what he says. Is the next episode. We've got too many things planned tonight, but we wanted the writer to know that we did receive the letter, and we're going to try to give him an answer to part of the question. We're not in the citizenship renunciation business, so we will not be addressing that part of the question, but we will address the rest of the question.
Okay. All right, then we are going to bring on our guest, and we are going to have Theresa. Theresa Robertson is a licensed psychotherapist in the private practice area. She's been involved in advocating for rational sexual offense law since 2016 and is active at both national and state levels. She's a founding member of the PARSO, which is Pennsylvania RSOL, and she serves as the executive director of that organization. Theresa is passionate about working towards solutions that both prevent sexual abuse and honors the inherent worth of dignity of all human beings. Theresa, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Andy. Good to be here.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on short notice.
Yeah.
Larry, you had set this up.
She had ample notice. I texted her last night at midnight.
Oh, good for you.
I mean, isn't that enough?
8 p.m. way notice.
We had a discussion about treatment some number of episodes back, and a person wanted to know if you don't admit criminal responsibility, if you don't tell them what they want to hear, they will terminate you from treatment, and then all these bad things happen. And being that I'm not an expert, I opine that I think you could possibly do treatment without any harm, because if the stuff doesn't apply to you, it doesn't apply to you. But again, I'm no expert. And then we had one of our transcript subscribers wrote in, that's in Fort Leavenworth in a military facility. There's two over there, but he wrote in and said that they actually had created a program for those who maintain their innocence, and he felt that the program was okay because of what it focused on. And to that subscriber, I don't have your letter to read. We filed by last name, and it got lost in all the files. It's in the computer, but I don't know which one it is. But he said that there was it did address thinking errors, and that he thought that type of treatment program was okay. So once he listens and reads the transcript of this episode, he can write back in again and tell us where we're right and where we're wrong. But that's the setup for it. And Theresa, I didn't send you any questions in advance, but with a limited scope of what we're going to talk about, where we're going with this is about treatment and what harm can be done if the person is forced to participate and they have no sexual offending, or the type of offending that they did is not representative, is not that they're not doing treatment that's proper for that type of an offense. So go ahead, Andy, you and Theresa.
I can agree with that side of it, though, Theresa, that because I think treatments come in kind of probably more than two flavors, but two flavors where one is a hatchet job and another one is someone that actually cares about the treatment process. So I think the one that we are mostly concerned with is one that's like a hatchet job where they're just trying to like shame and blame you about all kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think, there's more than two flavors, and I think it's important to mention that it is not a black or white thing. There's a continuum in terms of care, from really gold standard stuff that works and helps people to live lives that are meaningful and purposeful, and to move on from any mistakes they've made. And then there's this one size fits all, and different, and there are approaches that clearly don't work. The research indicates they don't. One of the first approaches that kind of in this area of SO-specific treatment was relapse prevention, which was taken from the addictions community, and it's pretty much been demonstrated to be ineffective, and unfortunately there's still plenty of that around. So it's really, there's lots of good treatment out there, and there's lots of not good treatment out there. And there are lots of good therapists, and there are lots of not good therapists in any area, including this one. And we all probably have either experienced personally or heard horror stories about people who are in mandated treatment, who don't belong there. Maybe they did commit a crime, and nonetheless their risk is so low that to be in a one-size-fits-all treatment group and be subjected to these weekly meetings for the duration of their probation, as opposed to and these are the these are the programs of the treatment, if you will, on the one end of the spectrum where things have gone really wrong. There are folks sitting in these groups that's costing them money. Their risk is no higher than anyone who, if we look at Hanson's research, right, and we know that that there's plenty of folks who leave prison, and we know that with minimal risk, and even after they're out for
Right.
a year or two, it continues to decrease. And rather than people being able to finish up with completed the program, they finish up with treatment. They magically successfully complete treatment when their probation ends, the day their probation
Correct.
ends. And ethically, there's no, not the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics, not the American Psychological Association Code of Ethics. There's no code of ethics for therapists that doesn't clearly state that providing services, providing therapy after the saturation point when there is no benefit to be received is unethical. So that's only one of many things that can go awry,
Right.
And Larry mentioned this, originally this, my screen went blank, but I'm still here. Okay. So Larry mentioned the, the case when someone basically maintains their innocence, and they're in one of these programs that kind of requires folks to fess up, so to speak, and they're not getting there, and that's really interesting. Number one, a certain percentage of those folks actually probably are innocent, right? And
Sure.
then
Totally.
and then there are others who are in maybe a state of denial, and that's and that there's research in terms of, so you probably have heard of the Good Lives model. Is that familiar to you?
I think I can figure out what it means. Can you describe that
really
quick?
quick? It's kind of a framework for that you can provide therapy within, and it focuses on what's really important, and it's related to desistance from criminal behavior, is that people are getting treatment that actually helps them acquire all of the 11 primary goods that all human needs. And those are life, knowledge, play, work, agency, inner peace, relatedness, community, spirituality, pleasure, and creativity. So those are all things that should be dealt with, to the extent that the person who's in therapy would like to address them. And so
on that list, what's funny to me is a lot of the things that the registry keeps you from about half of those things of having anything.
Exactly. and we know that in order for people to live like meaningful, purposeful lives, and they need to be able to access these things. All humans do, right? So if we really want people to desist from offending, whether it's sexual offending or any other offending, we want to be providing services that help them to achieve their full potential, if you will. And that full potential is pretty much driven by what matters to them. What makes their life worth living, not what I think should make their life worth living. And in a lot of the treatment programs on that end of the spectrum where things go so awry and it is harmful, they have one treatment goal, and that treatment goal is prevention, nothing else. So of those 11 primary goods, there's nothing. It's all about prevention.
Let me ask you this question. There were things, so there were two different treatments. There was one while I was still inside, and then I had to go through the one for a little while outside. And I don't remember which one it was, but there were things that I learned that people may do with each other that I'd never considered that people would do. And like, I didn't want those images in my head. Like, hey, if that's your jam, like, man, knock yourself on that jam. But that wasn't my issue. So, and I wasn't in any sort of treatment that was like any, like gay bashing. Like there was none of that. There was no a testament to faith. There was none of that. It was like, but I was like, I didn't want to know that.
Yeah. And that's one of the that's the one size fits all thing when there are people very low risk, probably one-time offenders, when we know most people are one-time offenders, and a lot of them are pretty young, and they're sitting and they're listening to this stuff over and over and over again, and not helpful at all.
What do we do?
Well,
I mean, this stuff is mandated at a legal level, and the policy people that are writing the policy, they don't know what best practices are, what the evidence shows. They're just appeasing the constituency.
Exactly. Yeah, and I will say that there are people in this field. I am a psychotherapist, and I do not do this work for a number of reasons. Okay. I'm a member of ATSA because I do work with non-offending minor attracted persons, and I also have done research in terms of looking at, we've talked about this in the past, compassion-focused therapy for people who have sexually offended, but not people who are mandated to treatment. I don't do that, and for my own reasons. Nonetheless,
I'm going to ask you about that one in a second.
But nonetheless, there are a lot of phenomenal people out there who do that kind of work, and they're actually they care deeply for their clients, and they do work towards advocacy to try and get this changed, to try and promote. Jill Levinson, for instance, is really focused on trauma-informed care, which has been woefully absent among this population almost since the beginning, if not from the beginning. There's other there are treatment providers and groups of different groups in different states as well as nationally, including ATSA, that are advocating and really try to move the needle towards practices that are increasingly more effective and more holistic in terms of really truly helping the person not only prevent recidivism, should that be a risk, but also to become the people that they can be, right?
Yeah. Larry, you have a question?
I got two questions. I'm going to set up two scenarios, which is bringing it back to the point of what we're going to go to is about the harm. So I'm going to set up scenario number one. A 24-year-old, and we won't even do gender, has a consensual relationship with a 17-year-old, and whether they're same gender or different gender, I'm not going to go there, but it was totally consensual. And the only thing was they were brought into the law enforcement community by the fact that state has an age of consent of 18. What that person, if it happened in this state, they're going to have to get treatment. What harm comes to them for getting treatment? One error they made was a thinking error that the 24-year-old did not take the time to realize that they couldn't have that relationship, even though it's consensual as much as they loved each other. So you deal with the thinking error. What other harm could come from the treatment modalities that are likely to put that person in, so that they can milk them dry for the 5 years of their supervision?
Well, one of them is what Andy just mentioned, right? So you got this 24-year-old who is sitting in a room full of, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 probably other males, and there's likely that everyone in that group is not in his situation, that there have probably been some, and they're going to start repeating their abuse histories, and that person's going to be exposed to that. I mean, Andy's sitting here saying, I don't want these images in my head, and I don't want to know what images Andy does have in his head. Either, and that's not helpful at all. It's not helpful. The other thing is if this 24-year-old is not benefiting from the therapy, now maybe this person is lucky and he ends up in a program that's halfway decent and they do individualize the treatment. Then he may be able to get some benefit from it, and that will be great. But even that would come to a point where it's not going to be beneficial anymore.
Correct. It would go for the entire time of your probation here, that part really I find objectionable.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And that doesn't happen everywhere. but it happens in way too many places across this country. I know it happens here in Pennsylvania in some instances, and in others it doesn't. It depends on the luck of the draw, where you live, who happens to be authorized by the SOAB to provide that kind of treatment. Some have moved forward in a way that's reasonable, and that 24-year-old might luck out and land with one of them and get some individualized treatment. So here, I believe in therapy. I am a therapist. I give it, and I also have a therapist. I receive it. So if anyone can land in a decent program where they're guided by ethical concerns, and the treatment is individualized and it's collaborative, there can be benefit. And if it's not, then there can be real harm.
Okay, scenario number 2. Got an ugly divorce, and which this is not so far-fetched. The one partner manages to convince a 13-year-old to say he touched me there, or she touched me there. It doesn't have to be gender specific. And the accused is told that they're going to go to prison for 50 years and that they're going to be convicted based on that minor's testimony. And they take a plea and they get a small amount of incarceration, and then they're put in treatment so that they can and they actually nothing happened. The touching, if it occurred, was totally appropriate touching, but they get put in treatment. And if they say, well, I took the plea, but I really didn't do anything, but I took the plea to save my kid, how does treatment hurt that person?
Well, again, it's going to depend on the provider, and it does run down that continuum. But if we're talking about the far end of the continuum where things do not go well, that person is put in a position where he's going to have to admit to doing something he didn't do if he ever wants to move forward at all. And
right.
And you don't have to be a therapist or have any knowledge of psychology to know that that's not a healthy thing for anybody. What's interesting too about this, in terms of maintaining innocence, even folks who have committed a certain sexual offense, there's in the desistance research, there's some evidence to suggest that part of the process of being able to get to the place where you can create and develop a new new identity, a new pro-social identity, involves kind of managing the stigma that comes with acting in ways that are harmful to others. And in the case of people who've sexually offended, there's a stigma also with that label of sex offender. So there's this huge stigma that needs to be managed before the person can kind of move on. And during that process, there's a series of denials, like denying responsibility, denying injury, denying the victim, condemnation of the condemners. There's, and that's part of this process of being able to get to the place where you can, because the stigma is so, it brings on so much shame, this deep, deep shame that can be immobilizing for humans, and our minds it just sometimes can't handle it. And so people will kind of start off in a place where the denial is there for a reason, and a good reason. But if they're in a decent treatment program and they can process and move through, processing their own past traumas, processing the shame and the stigma, getting to all of that, they can get to the place where then there's this shift in how they see themselves. They start to see themselves, in the context of those 11 primary human goods, right? So the whole thing with denial is important on both sides, not just folks who are denying because they didn't do anything, but also folks who are denying and have done something, but there's a psychological process they have to go through to get through the other side.
So I appreciate. I think I understand, and I think what I'm taking from this, Theresa, is that if you're lucky enough to be in an individualized treatment, you can benefit. If you're in my state, particularly, you're not going to get any individualized treatment, and this could be very detrimental.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like, we were talking about polys last week. It's kind of a kabuki show that the treatment provider is just there to shame and blame you and make life hell, and essentially almost be a what would be the word? Almost like an informant for probation to get you to admit to doing things that you shouldn't be doing under the auspices of a HIPAA and keeping things private. And this is treatment, so to speak. And then they go report all of that to probation.
Yep. No. And, those are some of the reasons I don't do this work.
But let me, may I ask you though, wouldn't you be one of our advocates of running treatment that is effective? And I don't want to call you out if you're not comfortable answering, but it seems like since you know this from that side, why don't you become a treatment provider that does it for our people to benefit them, to those that you can touch? I mean, it would only be 10 or 15 people at a time.
Well, because in order to treat folks who are mandated, and I do treat folks who aren't mandated, and folks who who are minor attracted, who have not offended. But if I was doing mandated treatment, I would be required to get it on the polygraph wagon, to report to POs. Those would be requirements. And I'm not willing to do that. Depending on
the state, you would have to follow the program that they have set up for how they want to do treatment.
And that's not something I'm willing to do. But there are people who people who do this kind of work, who are advocating and do advocate for more effective and evidence-based treatment that is holistic, that is trauma-informed, that does support the Good Lives model. Actually, there was some research done in North America, in Canada and the U.S. They were looking at the extent to which the Good Lives was incorporated in SO treatment in those two countries, and they only found one in the United States where it was being implemented in total. The others, there was kind of like there was some. It was Good Lives model informed, but it wasn't the whole package. So we have a lot of work to do. And
Larry, is there anything else before we wrap that section up?
I think I got what I was looking for, and hopefully this is helpful to those who are going to be facing this requirement to get treatment, and they're going to pick your treatment provider for you in most instances.
Right.
And it's going to be what Theresa said. It's going to be if you're not on board with what they want, that treatment provider will not be on their list.
Theresa, anything before we go? Do you want to leave any sort of contact information for people to reach out to if they have any further questions?
Sure.
You don't have to.
No problem. So I can be reached at, I never know which email to give. So I'll just do.
Do you want to leave your Parsol one?
Theresa@parsol.org. You can reach me there.
That should do it.
Yeah. That
cool.
would be great. Thanks
and
for letting me.
Should they send you a blank check? Should they send a blank check there to get treatment from you?
A blank check. Check. You know what? I'll tell you
Just
what.
kidding.
They can just send me their credit card information, and I can stick them into auto pay. How about that?
Oh, perfect. Excellent. And it was suggested it would be Theresa, THERESA @PARSOL.org.
Exactly. Thanks.
THERESA. Thank you so very much, Theresa. Really, really appreciate you spending.
Thanks for letting me.
And we'll talk to you soon.
You guys. All right. Bye now.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact them by email, registrymatterscast@gmail.com. You can call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. Want to support Registry Matters on a monthly basis? Head to patreon.com/registrymatters. Not ready to become a patron? give a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, or tell your buddies at your treatment class about the podcast. We want to send out a big heartfelt support for those on the registry. Keep fighting. Without you, we can't succeed. You make it possible. Okay, Larry, and we'll just keep driving this bus, won't we?
Fantastic. We've got more territory to cover.
We do. We'll go over this case that we got with United States versus Ellis. And I think you helped with some questions here again. And this came out of the Fourth Circuit. And is that the East Coast middle section? Like North Carolina? Is that?
This covers North Carolina.
Okay. Because that's where this case came from. I was just trying to make sure. Do you remember where else this covers?
I do not.
Okay, that's cool. I know it's like Middle Eastern seaboard kind of stuff. All right. And then why did you put this in here for us to discuss this week?
Oh, because it's important. It reaffirms an existing precedent regarding internet bans and the total prohibition regarding legal pornography, which is a very common ban that you can't look at anything that's even remotely stimulating.
This is my question. So I could get myself put back on probation just because I want to be able to look at porn.
Well, I don't know if you'd want to do that.
And we've been talking about, like, God, Larry, maybe the second or third episode we talked about internet bans. And we've had Packingham. I remember a case out of West Virginia. We've covered a whole bunch of cases. God, we even talked about one super duper recently, and I can't really think of exactly what it was. But why does this keep coming up?
Well, I guess probation authorities are having trouble understanding and comprehending that these complete bans are unconstitutional. And as we say, they can do it until they're stopped. So Mr. Ellis has temporarily stopped them. And I say temporarily because we don't know if it's going to be temporary or not. They may come back and give him. We'll just go into it on the breakout. Right. But he has temporarily stopped them.
And you're saying that the Fourth Circuit has green-lighted viewing porn?
Legal porn. Be careful now. We're not talking about illegal porn. Okay. But they have.
It's funny to me, Larry. Like if we would bring Theresa back in my brain, I don't even ever think about illegal porn. I just think about like the adults doing naughty things.
Yes, they're porn and sexually suggestive stuff is legal in this country. There are fewer and fewer print publications, but what has gone the way of the dinosaur, the print publications, has been replaced by a plethora of adult sites that you can go to where theoretically everything you're watching is adult-oriented. And so the Fourth Circuit has, in fact, green-lighted the viewing of adult porn unless there's an individualized finding, which is what I keep saying on this podcast. Probation authorities, listen carefully. You have broad powers to do things if you individually tailor them to that offender. You can do almost anything, but it has to be tailored to that offender. And you can't help yourself for some reason. You want to put these conditions on everyone.
It would be easier to go, okay, let's just throw out the dragnet and you know, like there's the stupid condition in Georgia that you can't drive alone. I know that's not related to this, but I'm just saying like that is just a blanket restriction. I suppose if you were one that had picked up people like hitchhikers and done your deeds, then it would be appropriate to say that you can't drive alone because you can't help yourself, as you would say, of doing things with people while you're being unsupervised in a car. But if your crime did not involve adult-oriented suggestive material, the penthouses and the Playboys, then, like, I don't know. It comes back to, like, a prudish kind of societal idea that internet porn is bad.
Well, the Fourth Circuit affirmed that such bans can be imposed with individualized reasons articulated. And probation authorities, I mean, your hitchhiking would be a great example. In the behavioral contract in New Mexico, it says, one of the terms of the many plethora that are in that behavioral contract, it says you will not pick up a hitchhiker. And
same here.
That has nothing to do with anything other than they thought it up because maybe somewhere deep in the bowels of the archives of the corrections department, they have someone who committed a sexual offense after having picked up a hitchhiker. But that was one anomaly. And you would be able to comfortably impose that condition if it was related to the offense. And it doesn't even have to be directly related, but tangentially related to the offense, to the uniqueness. But you just can't help yourself. You go out and you find something that happened once, we call the saber-toothed tiger, and then you put that condition on everyone, and it's going to keep tripping you up over and over again because there are going to be more and more cases filed. Each time we build this body of case law, this is a reiteration of the body of case law that's out there. And more people are going to find out that you can't do this, and you're going to have more and more of these to defend. And I realize you get to do it freely because you have unlimited resources, and the offender doesn't, and you have the upper hand. But you're eventually going to be stopped because you can't just make the rules apply to everybody. The courts are telling you that over and over again.
Does this mean that we can run to our handlers and tell them, I'm going to look at porn all I want, FYP?
I don't think I would do that.
Oh, damn
it. It certainly doesn't mean that. What it does mean specifically is that Mr. Ellis, who was the litigant here, can view adult porn until such time as the government puts on evidence that such viewing is detrimental to him, to his rehabilitation. And it was noted that the district court, but this is the appellate court speaking, that the district court heard no evidence about how that pornography use may or may not influence Ellis's behavior. In fact, the court stated that the government only presented that the pornography ban was necessary to avoid, quote, occasions of sin, such that Ellis would not, quote, be put in a position to be tempted to violate the conditions of his release. That's all a bunch of hypothetical gobbledygook, folks. While that reasoning may seem intuitive or common sense to some, it must be supported by evidence according to the United States Code, and it cites the section that it has to be reasonably related. So you're going to have to get over this thing of hypotheticals, and you're going to have to put on evidence to justify these bans. I mean, this is what you're going to have to do if you want these. And their fear is that the cameras are going to come rolling in on them, and that they're going to be asked because someone is going to do something that makes the news. And they're going to be asked, how was a person allowed to have this access? And they would rather be not in that position where they granted access. They would rather have you fight your way to get that access rather than in making a case-by-case decision. That's just the way they think.
And then and anything else before we move on to the kind of not quite the feature, but the final segment that we wanted to go over? Anything else you want to cover on this?
Oh, there is. I really like some of the dicta in this case, and I'm going to quote. It says the court stated, quote, as a practical matter, the internet is likely to be vital to Ellis's reentry to society, including for securing housing and employment. Ellis told the district court that he relies on the internet-based apps on his smartphone to look for jobs and commute to work, and that's really significant here. That the court is saying that the internet is integral to his rehabilitation, and in fact, they conclude by saying at the end that in fact that thus while the district court was concerned about assuring Ellis's treatment, an internet ban may be as likely to hinder Mr. Ellis' progress as to help it. That's powerful.
That is kind of cool. I think about when you get into a city that does have public transportation, that you can just punch in like, I'm here and I need to go there, and it will tell you the bus routes. Yes, you could figure these things out. They've had bus maps and, time cards and all that stuff, but like that puts you at a disadvantage for someone that has an app on their phone that can just alleviate that level of consternation of figuring out what time you need to be to what bus stop and how long it'll take you to get there. The boss tells you to be to work by 7:00 and you need to know that you need to get on the bus at 5 a.m. It just alleviates an angle of you trying to figure all these things out. It puts you at a disadvantage to other people.
Well, absolutely. And a lot of those methods have gone by or going by or have gone by the wayside.
Sure.
You used to see racks and racks of paper bus maps. I don't see them in my city anymore. You used to could get on the old-fashioned phone and you could call the bus information number where they had operators standing by to give you that information. Okay. I'm not sure that those operate anymore. That because everybody's using their phones. I mean, I used one today. I used an app to pick up my groceries. They notify you that your order is ready, and they have a button you can press to say I'm en route. And then when you arrive, rather than having to call inside and see if someone can answer the old-fashioned phone, you just press I'm here, what slot number you're in, and all of a sudden they materialize with your grocery order.
Yes, a human magically appears. I'm with you. And so fewer and fewer things would then become off-limits places, like we're talking about the porn thing. Like the rest of the internet, like the internet is not just bad. It's not like dropping your kid off in the red light districts and saying, hey, have fun, kids. There's like an actual like useful tool. There's bad stuff in the library if you go look for it, but like the whole library is not bad.
Absolutely. And this case again is United States versus Ellis from the Fourth Circuit. We neglected to name one of the cases we talked about last week, but believe it or not, I took it upon myself to mail a follow-up to all the subscribers to the transcripts, and I sent them my analysis and the name of the case.
Oh,
so we have communicated with the subscribers about what we omitted last week.
Very good. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And let's see here. Oh, this is something that I asked you. Moving on, I asked you if you so I guess to set it up. The states are moving into their legislative sessions this month, and I was interested in trying to provide like a little bit of a drip method of doing policy analysis. We know these bills are going to be coming around in all 57 states, and looking for the ones that may impact us, and not just going no new PFR laws, but which piece and how do we look at these things to try and get on board with legislators and talk to them in a way that would resonate with them, whether that be from a finance side or what. So take it away, sir. Do you expect that they can can most PFRs run to their state capitals and convince lawmakers to do what we want them to do?
Well, you can certainly, in a non-COVID environment, you could go to your capital unless you live in Raleigh, or if you're going to go to the capital in Raleigh, which I think is within 1,000 feet of prohibited zones. But in theory, you could go to your capital. Our session here in New Mexico will be meeting without public participation. But there are a number of ways you can communicate with your lawmakers. But I don't expect it would be easy if you have no experience. I think you've got a little bit of homework to do. You got to familiarize yourself with the process, and you got to figure out to whom you should direct communication, because it's easy just to start calling your lawmaker, and he or she may not be in a position to do anything for you on a particular bill, depending on where it's positioned at the time. It may not be that they can help you. It may not be on the floor, and so we can go into all these processes about who you would call. It's key that you figure out who to communicate with.
All right, and that would be, how do you figure that out?
Well, to begin with, you've got to figure out how your legislature works, and we make the joke about you got to figure out where the door is so you can actually go visit. But you've got to figure out how legislation moves, and most of them are going to move through a committee process of some type. Very few things just go straight to the floor for a vote. So you've got to figure out that movement from introduction to where it's going to go, and those are the key people that in the process. You've got to familiarize yourself and know how it works. You're going to be a lot more successful on the baseball field if you understand the rules of the game.
That's poppycock. So you're saying that we should go visit our legislators' websites. So I've looked at the Georgia one, and it's set up by like committees. Can you give me the quick version of what a committee is?
Well, the committees are how most legislatures work to vet proposals. When you have hundreds and hundreds of proposals that are introduced in each session, you could not take all of those to the full body. So the legislatures break up into committees, and your particular legislation, for example, in Georgia, if it were a House bill in Georgia, they're going to, if it deals with registration, they're going to assign it to the House Judiciary Committee non-civil, for example. Now, since registration is a civil regulatory scheme, they start out by putting it in the wrong committee.
I was just going to ask you that question. Okay.
But nobody's ever bothered to go back. Nobody's ever bothered to make that. Nobody's ever bothered to make that argument. Now, I've raised it to a Georgia advocate. I say the first thing you need to do is go talk to the chair of the Legislative Civil Committee and say, this actually should be assigned to you, Madam Chairman or Mr. Chairman, right. Because this is a civil regulatory scheme. This doesn't belong in the non-civil stuff. They deal with criminal laws over there, and this is a civil regulatory scheme. Not to say you'd get any different outcome, but that's one that's one thing that you would want to do is to the speaker and the leadership, if it's the House bill, is going to determine what committee it goes to, and in my state, you're going to get 2 committee assignments. If it's a House bill, you're going to get 2 House committees. If it's a Senate bill, you're going to get 2 Senate committees upon introduction.
Why would they run it across 2?
Well, in theory, it gives more perspective. So a House bill here is going to get, like this House Bill 56 that we've already identified that's in pre-file, that deals with sex offender registration. It's going to be assigned to the House Consumer and Public Affairs Committee, and it's going to be assigned to the House Judiciary Committee. We already know that because that's their practice. And if it's detected upon the legislative analysis that there's a fiscal impact, it could also be assigned to the House Appropriation and Finance Committee. So it conceivably could have 3 committee assignments, which makes it very difficult to move a piece of legislation when you've got that many committees to go through, because you have to go through each one and get a due pass, and report that out to the floor, and go back to the next committee, and then you got to go back out to the floor, and then you got back to the next committee. And it can be a death sentence if something gets like 3 committee assignments. But we do that here for due diligence.
Well, that was going to be so we would want things to have more committees to try and gum up the rails to keep things from going through.
Well, as I tell people, you're primarily going to be in the killing business. There are very few bills that you're going to be in favor of that deal with registrants. So therefore, you're mostly going to be in the killing business, and I think any advocate can affirm that. So therefore, anything that you can do that will help you in your goal to kill bad legislation, that's a plus for you, no matter what it is. Other than anything unlawful. Other than anything unlawful, of course.
Well, let's say it clears all the committee hurdles. What happens next?
Well, if it's cleared its committee, then it's going to go committee assignments. It's going to go to the floor for a vote, and once it does that, it's very, very rare that anything doesn't pass on a floor vote, because it's gotten the endorsement and the vetting, and people have these delusions that somehow it's going to fail on the floor vote. It happens. If something just barely squeaked through the committee process, and it was a highly divided, and it's a very emotionally driven bill, you can sometimes, I'll give you an example. In the last long session we had 2 years ago, there was a proposal to repeal a 1969 law that bans abortions in this state. Now, that has not been able to be enforced since 1973 because the Supreme Court decided that, at least in the first trimester, that abortions are a right of a woman to choose. Well, there's fear that might no longer be the case if Roe versus Wade's overturned. So they were repealing that thing that would allow for prosecution. That did not make it through, although it did make it through the committees. But it got to the floor, and there was enough opposition that materialized, and it failed on the Senate floor. Now, some of those senators have now been defeated and will not be back. And that bill is actually generating a lot of attention this year. I can't delete the emails as fast as they come in. I mean, they actually are able to generate email faster than you can hit delete. So what we have to do in a case like this, we have to direct them to a special box that you're not going to read, because you could not begin to read all the emails that come in on something controversial. But my point is that sometimes something is voted down on the floor, but it's very seldom. If you let it get out of committee and you let it get to the floor, it's going to be approved.
And after it goes through that side, it jumps across the street and goes over to the Senate side. If they have, is that called bicameral? Is that the right word?
Yes. If you have a bicameral, and only Nebraska has a unicameral, the same bill has to pass both sides. And therefore, we try not to have the same bill introduced. Maryland and some of the states, they just pride themselves and they dual file the identical bill on both sides. So that makes you, rather than having 900 bills, that makes you have 1,800 bills. And
that's got to make it easier.
How does it do that?
Being silly.
But so you have so we discourage that. The rare lawmaker will seek out that, but it rarely happens here. So if it's a House bill, once it completes that journey in the House and it's been approved by the House, it would cross the rotunda and it would be introduced as a bill in the Senate. It'll keep its House bill number, but it'll be introduced, and it will be, after it's read twice by title, it will be referred to committees of the Senate, and it will start the same journey all over again.
But if it makes it there, then that almost, like if the House passed it or the Senate passed it, then once it goes to the other side, it certainly should pass, right?
Absolutely not. They're independent.
You people.
They're independent of one another. They have different political considerations. I think a good example, all you have to do is take a look at the recent stimulus bill that passed in the U.S. Congress. The president, upon it being presented to him with a $600 payment, said he would prefer a $2,000 payment. The House immediately passed legislation to provide a $2,000 payment. It goes over to the other side of the rotunda, and they can't even have a vote. And it passed the House, I think, almost unanimously. But it couldn't even get a vote on the other side because they had different considerations. So just because it passes one side of the rotunda does not mean it's going to pass the other side. The House typically, they serve shorter terms of office. Like in the U.S. House, it's 2 years versus 6 years for the Senate. In our state, it's 2 years versus 4 years. Theoretically, that makes you closer to the people, and you're more susceptible to the whims of the people. The deliberative body is usually the Senate, because they have greater distance between having to face the wrath of the angry mob. So they can be more statesmen. That's the theory of the longer terms. The Senate, in fact, the U.S. Senate was originally not elected by the people; they were elected by the state legislatures. Right. You know, but that is the purpose of the Senate. You have a more deliberative. We don't have just the whimsy what the people want right now, because what they want right now may not be the best public policy.
I'm looking at the clock, Larry, and I really want to dig into this, but we're coming up on where we have to break. Can we dig into what will happen now that we've done this little brief introduction to how government works? Can we come back and look at House Bill 56 next week and dig into like the strategy of how you're going to attack it to try and keep it from passing?
So we can do that. I don't know how much strategy I can get into, but we can certainly go through what the bill would do if it were to be passed the way it's currently written, at least the part related to sex offender registration. There are other parts of the bill. It's 30 pages, but we can go into that. And I will give you a couple of things that I will throw out as arguments that I would be using. And I'd like to do that, because it maybe helps some other advocates to figure out. Sometimes you can come up with arguments, if you're creative, that you haven't thought of, that'll resonate with the people you don't think that you can sway.
And you're saying that from the point of view that you may be on Team Blue and you have arguments that would resonate with Team Red, and so you could then have Team Red people in your camp that would help you kill something, even though you're on an opposing side.
Absolutely. And now sometimes the teams magically do a contortion, and they even though they claim they believe something, when it comes to a controversial issue like this, they magically don't believe that. But you can at least remind them of their core beliefs, and sometimes they will stick with them. And so that's the type of thing we can get into next week when we look at House Bill 56.
Groovy. Then let's cover, because we only have just a handful of minutes left, so we will run through these things really quickly. This first article comes from the Los Angeles Daily News. A second look at unjust prison terms. You put this in here for some reason, and I'm going to let you drive the bus on that reason.
Well, I think I'm just letting people know that their enlightenment is beginning to happen, that extremely long prison sentences, all they do is cost us a bunch of money in terms of incarceration, in terms of lost productivity, lost human capital. And that is beginning to be recognized. The political discourse is beginning to take place. And it's going to take some time to dismantle this prison industrial complex we have. But at least the discussions are beginning to happen. So that's why I put it in there.
Cool. I like that one. And sort of semi-similar. It says Kansas inmates will get the COVID-19 vaccine before most of the public, and here's why. And I know the reason why is going to be because you have people that are in close proximity to each other, and then they're just going to keep passing the human malware around to each other. Seems like it would be a wise place to, maybe not the first round of people that get it, but early rounds of people that would get vaccinated would be people in prison, because they can't do anything to separate themselves.
Well, I put that in there because our corrections department announced that they're going to begin vaccinations, and the conservatives have just gone bonkers here on KKOB radio, trying to stir up anger about the prisoners being put ahead of older people. And the prisoners don't have a lot of options to do much in terms of social distancing, in terms of PPP. All of that, they're at the mercy of, there's very little control you have over your life. And yes, you put yourself, and that's what the conservatives will say, but they were not sentenced to death. They were sentenced to confinement.
Right. Right. And I remember I went to the legislative, like they were doing crossover day in this state, and we were trying to help out another organization and talking about like food stamps or SNAP benefits, I think is what it was. And the legislator said, well, what do you do with a person that hasn't committed a crime, and you want to prioritize a person who has committed a crime over someone that hasn't to getting these benefits? What's like now this person is being benefited from it. Like there should be there should be some sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Punishment. And I don't want to say it that word. There's a different word I'm looking for, that they should have a penalty for being in prison. It's like, well, they're still human, right? But I don't think that resonated very well.
Well, I don't understand, because you're not penalizing anybody or you're supposed to take applications as they come. If they're eligible, they're eligible. Yeah, right. I don't understand.
This was to change the law, though. If many SNAP benefits or other kinds of public service kind of things like that are reduced when people have convictions.
Right, and I'm saying though, but the federal government is the provider of those benefits. So if the state doesn't make a prohibition, and if the federal government doesn't have a prohibition, you're not giving anybody preferential treatment. You just take the applications as they come. I wouldn't know how you could even begin to tell a person, you made a mistake in your life 12 years ago. We will let you starve because of that mistake. Right. You need to take a good look at yourself. If you think that, and you call yourself anything of any type of religious, and I don't want to even name a religion, but if you affirm that you believe in any religious doctrine, I would challenge you to tell me which one justifies letting someone starve because of a mistake they made. I'd like to have that on the podcast in a future episode.
Man, you're getting feisty. I like when Larry gets feisty.
Well, these people just can't justify that. You would never let a person. You wouldn't let a dog do that if you went on the street and found a dog starving. But yet you'll tell a person you can't have food because of a mistake you made. What kind of human being would do that?
Somebody wants me to get you to say a word, but I'm going to refrain for the time being. Let's move over to this article from WGXA. This comes out of Georgia. It says, Perryman goes to prison for failing to report cruise ship trip registered sex offender. He's one of our people. He's a PFR, Larry. Apparently he took a trip to Cozumel on a Carnival cruise. And when he gets back to customs, the border protection was there waiting for him, and they placed this man under arrest. The marshals was prioritizing. They are prioritizing investigations for PFRs. who travel between states? That was really like my question that I wanted to ask you about. I understand the international part, but I didn't realize that they were doing anything with people that travel, that just move about between states.
Well, I think he traveled. I think that cruise went to Mexico, the way I read the article.
Yeah, but it also says that last paragraph, the United States Marshal Service has prioritized investigations of PFRs who travel between states or international.
Oh, yes, they do. Well, that's one of the components. That's one of the biggest reasons for the Adam Walsh Act to begin with, is that PFRs move from state to state, and they didn't register, and the state they moved from had no incentive to go track them down because you were happy that they left. And the state that they moved to had no idea. Well, that's what they mean by travel. They don't mean by just. Okay. To be specific with words, travel is different than they have changed residence. Well, but the way the statute is written in the Adam Walsh Act, the sex offender who travels in interstate commerce, and so if you move from one state to the other, that is considered travel. And if you move from one state to the other, the state that you move from now is obligated to notify you. If you disappear and don't stay pre Adam Walsh, if you disappeared, they uncorked the champagne and they said, good riddance. As long as their investigation revealed you had left the territory, they were happy. But now they're obligated to tell the feds who are not so happy, and they go track you down and they put you in federal prison because you did not comply with registration in the new state. And so they were waiting there for this man who failed to report that he was on a cruise ship, and they arrested him, and he is doing 20 months and then 5 years of supervised release. Is that federal then, or is that still like a level? Is that a state level? Federal. No, it's federal. He's going to be in a federal prison. He's going to have 5 years of supervision under the Federal Probation Service. And so what probably happened was that the passenger manifest was given to the marshals, maybe even before the cruise left. But by the time they got to it and figured out that he was on it when they checked their data, then that's why they were waiting for him when the cruise came back. So if he'd have been smart, he would have jumped off before he returned to the original port. No shit. Wow. Or perhaps he didn't know, but he was convicted in 2004, and I only say that because, that's 16, almost 17 years ago is that the person was convicted of the crime. And he is a level 2. Maybe that helped flag him as someone with a little bit higher priority. Perhaps. I don't even want to say that the levels actually do mean anything, but that's not inspiring, Larry, at all. So, well, that's the law. If you travel until you're out from under registration, you have this obligation to report. And I only put this final article in here just to have like a 30-second conversation with you. It's ACLU Council warns of unchecked power of Twitter, Facebook after Trump's suspension. You and I had a conversation on the phone about them banning Trump from these different social media platforms and how that actually may be something beneficial for us if he decides to go sue. So do you want to try to rehash that in 30 seconds or so? Well, I do believe that it will cause a discussion. It's going to. I was talking about contortionist earlier. Now this will be an example of contortionism, because all through the intervening 40 years since the government has dismantled the fairness doctrine in broadcasting, the conservatives have assured us that you do not need the government to intervene, that if there is a demand for the liberal do-gooder point of view on commercial broadcasting, that it will be satisfied by the marketplaces. Therefore, butt out and let us do what we want to do with our airwaves. They no longer belong to the people. They belong to the broadcasting conglomerates. That's the conservative viewpoint. Now, magically, now they're going to have to contort themselves into a new position. They're going to have to say, well, now this is different. The internet and this Twitter thingy and this Facebook thingy, this is different. And even though it's private ownership, there's a vital public interest served by allowing others. But you could not go to KKLB radio under that same doctrine and say, I deserve to be heard over your airwaves. the conservatives would never have had anything to do with that. They would have disavowed that validity of that argument. But now it may allow us to have, the positive is it may allow us to have a discussion as to what the public actually own. We used to believe that the public owned the airwaves and that the public had the right to dictate certain requirements to use our air. We abandoned that. Maybe we can have that discussion again. Does the public own Twitter? Does the public have a right to use Twitter? Does the public own Facebook? Do they have the right to? Because you have the right to not have the government interfere with your speech, but you do not have a right to be heard. You cannot demand that anybody who possesses a means of communication to give you access to their. Try going to a synagogue or to a church and say, I want your microphone because I have a different viewpoint and I'd like to spread it here in this sanctuary, and find out if they turn the microphone over to you.
I wonder, Larry, because the airwaves are such a finite resource and the internet is effectively an unlimited resource, there's no cost of you or me posting onto Twitter. Twitter's not going to notice it, but if we took up 30 minutes of time on any of these radio stations, well, they can't use that time for anything else, so it's a highly restricted space. I just wonder if that enters into the conversation, into the calculation.
It very well might. Like I say, this is going to be fascinating because the president's not going to go away and just go into the sunset and not be heard of. He is likely going to challenge this stuff, and we will see how the courts interpret what rights you have. But if you're a textualist, it doesn't give you any rights. Now, we'll see how magically they flip from being a textualist. It says the Congress shall make no law. That's what it says. Okay, that's the text of it. Are you going to evolve it and morph it into something? To use Scalia's terms, that's not what they said. So are you a textualist, Andy, or do you believe in this evolving standard of decency notion?
I'm going to pull the purposivism word out. How about that? We haven't done Scalia in a long time, Larry. We need to start bringing those clips back because he's fun.
So, yes, I bet a lot of people will all of a sudden become evolution, that we have an evolving standard of decency, and I bet they will not be a textualist when it comes to this.
I like it. Larry, we are like over time, and we're going to have too many pages to send the transcripts out, so we got to shut it down quick.
All right. So if you are a transcript subscriber, send us your comments and also help us spread the word. We've got the cost down to $6 a month.
Sweet. Excellent. Yeah, and if you want to sign up to do that, sign up at the $15 a month level over at Patreon, and then we will send a transcript to the place of your choice. And otherwise, you can find us over at registrymatters.co, and the phone number is 747-227-4477. Email at registrymatterscast@gmail.com, and of course, patreon.com/registrymatters. It's the best way to support the podcast. But you can find us over on Twitter, and there is a Facebook page. Shh. And there you'll find us on YouTube as well. Anything else, Larry, before we head out?
I think I've covered it.
Awesome. I appreciate it always, Larry. You're the best, and I will talk to you soon. Have a good night.
Good night.
You've been listening to FYP.